Hey lovelies, Lisa here, and yeah, it's that hashtagging time. Um, yeah, we're getting close to the end. I think we've got just maybe 10 more cards to go, including today's. Today's card is the Four of Swords, and it's actually a card that I have some real history with, and I may talk a little bit about that in a moment, including a reading that I did for myself earlier this week. So I may come to talk about that at the end of this video. But for now, just wanting to contextualize the Four of Swords within the suit of swords as a whole. So, sorry, singing bowls are kind of noisy, moving them around. Um, so, the swords, like the wands, like the other pointy suit, this is a suit that is about individuation, about what it means to be an I, right? An ego, a self standing tall. Now, with the wands, as we explored that question of individuation, of selfhood, of what it means to realize ourself, to fully actualize as a happy, skillful, potentially healthy, growthful individual. As we looked at that with the wands, where it took us was into the discussion of will, of the fire in the belly, of our drive, our energy, our oomph to engage the world. And the tension we saw in that suit was about the ways in which my energy is never just my energy, and grappling in that suit with the nature of individual effort being tied to our relationship with the whole world and our ability to give ourselves to our lives and to take in a way that might be somewhat vulnerable, to take in our connection with others and with the environment around us. Now, if the wands are the suit of the will, the suit of that fire that we associate with the knight who's responding, then the swords are not the suit of will, they're the suit of mind, and a mind that is the way I'm going to say this isn't going to make very much. Is going to be misleading at first, but a mind that is judging, that is discriminating. And I don't mean discriminating or judging in the pejorative sense. We think discrimination as being about prejudice and potentially like racism and otherism. And we think about judgment usually as, you're bad, or a negative, or a kind of stereotyping of the world that's not really responding to it in its uniqueness. Judgment usually sounds bad. Discrimination usually sounds bad. But what I'm actually talking about here is our capacity to weigh our experience, to say there's this and there's this, to look at the world and see the parts of it. And in understanding how the parts exist, to also understand how we want to navigate our path through the world. So, I'm talking about the quality of mind that's like the way that we can turn on the light in a dark room and suddenly see where all the furniture is so that we can walk through the room safely. The quality of mind is that quality of illuminating what exists and distinguishing one thing from another, if that makes any sense. So mind here isn't just about the intellect or about being cerebral or about concepts or about words, and it isn't about like concepts as opposed to emotions or physical experiences. Mind here, the quality of the human being that is associated with the swords, mind here is really, it's mind in the sense of understanding, right? Of the way in which we make sense of our lives. So I've been talking about how the sword has two edges, because as we make sense of our world, we're continually making distinctions. There's this side and there's that side. There's right, there's left. There's white, there's black. There's good, there's bad. And if you think about the figures like justice in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, all of the figures that are associated with judging, with assessing, what we tend to see in those depictions are a figure carrying a sword. Of course, if I if I if I had my wits about me, I would have pulled out some of these cards, so you know what I'm talking about. So I'm going to look really quickly for Justice. Here we go. Justice holds, you know, the balance, but he, she also holds a sword. So it's that quality of how we weigh and assess. Assess is a good word, I think. How we assess our lives, how we make sense of it. And, you know, we talked about this a little bit with the Two of Swords as it appears in the in Maline's Tabula Mundi deck, where the Two of Swords gets associated with Libra in the Crowley system, and very much with, not just with Libra, but with Ma'at, and the Egyptian goddess of judgment in the afterlife. So that sort of figure of justice, weighing our hearts against the world, against truth. So in that context then, you know, we've seen with the first 4 cards in the suit of swords, we've seen a kind of stasis. Like, these are not active cards. These aren't cards that are depicting the world in action. They're not cards that are, like, if you think back to the Two of Wands or the Three of Wands, that show figures engaging the environment. Instead, these cards are depicting a kind of stillness, this kind of peace in the Crowley system that we talked about with the Maline deck, with the Tabula Mundi, the kind of equilibration, the balancing of competing paths, that sort of impasse that needs to be reconciled between 2 different possibilities. Or in this card, you know, the sort of alternatively heartache or heartbreak on the one hand, and maybe a kind of sacrifice that leads to triumph on the other hand, as we talked about in yesterday's card discussion. You know, this is a still moment. This is an emblematic moment. There's no activity here. And then in the Four of Swords, we really get an image of stasis, of things coming to a still place. And I think that movement towards stillness, that movement toward balance, is one of the tendencies of the suit of swords. This is a suit that is, if the wands are about a kind of movement toward conflict and battle, think of all the images in that suit of fighting, right? Of a kind of encounter that has clashing of wills at its core. The suit of swords keeps kind of like orbiting around this image of a kind of balance of opposites, or a kind of weighing of there's this and there's that, of being able to see alternatives. And that may mean, right, that the world breaks down into positions. You're here, I'm here, right? And that we have to navigate those positions. That's something we'll talk about with the Five of Swords tomorrow. But it's also very much a suit that recalls the kind of, I want to say paralysis that can happen as we try to make sense of our world, where we see all of the possibilities. And so then we find ourselves kind of stuck, not knowing exactly how to move forward. So, you know, this is a suit that moves toward, in the Crowley system, keywords like futility, or we'll see in the deck we're looking at today, words like doubt, words like interference, distraction. This is a suit which shows human activity frustrated precisely because we can see so many different possibilities. And which way do we go if we want to go toward the truth, if we want to go toward what matters most? So the Four of Swords, the classic image, you know, we have a knight who is not on his quest. He's in this state that's either a state of sleeping or a state of death. It's a suspended state, to be sure. His sword is lying as still as he is. Then there are the three other swords are suspended above him. There's a sense of retreat here, but it's also a sense that things have been stopped in the middle of what could be activity. This is a suspended moment. It's not a stopping point that a stopping point in the end of a cycle, right? So, you know, the very classic readings for the Four of Swords then would be, you know, something like retreat, recuperation, maybe convalescence after an illness, or sort of stepping back and recovering from a conflict. It's this image of a kind of withdrawal, a retreat that is temporary, or that entails a suspension of normal life, okay? So the deck that I wanted to look at today to talk a little bit more about this card, just briefly, is the Holanda Tarot. I got this in a trade. I really love this deck. It's the Swedish deck, so it's the Swedish Witch Tarot. The artist's name is Borkman, I think. I'll link, or the creator's name. I'll put that information below. And this is the first, I think, there might have been an edition before this one, but this is the more uncommon version. AGM also produced this in a deck that has purple borders and no keywords. Now, I don't have the book, the companion book, which I think only exists in Swedish, if it exists at all. So I'm going off of Google Translate for the keywords and just the images themselves. And Soren, if you're watching and you have better translations, let me know what they are. Anyway, so as I understand, the ace here, the keyword, perspicacity. So, I mean, this points toward the ways in which, you know, this the suit of swords is a suit of illumination, of being able to see, through things, cut through delusions, see, you know, make sense of the world. And then the 2 is peace, right? So already we're starting to see how the keywords that the Holanda Tarot uses are keywords that are associated with the Crowley deck. All the images are not either Crowley or particularly Smith-Waite. This card means sorrow, like the 3 of Swords in the Crowley deck. And the 4, we'll come back to this in a minute, means truce. So the 4 of Swords in the Crowley system is a card that is a particular kind of cessation of activity, a truce, like we haven't resolved things. It's not peace like the 2 in the Crowley system, where dualities have been resolved, right? The yin and the yang have come together, as we see above the figure's head. Instead, this is a truce. This is a momentary suspension. It may last, it may not last, but there's a kind of, and I love the relationship of this to meditation, right? And there's a lot of figures of this kind of meditating figure. There's a lot of that play within this deck. But, you know, this is a sense of that kind of calm that we can achieve, suspending the storminess of life. We haven't resolved it, but we can kind of hold everything in equilibrium for a period of time. We can make a truce. Hostilities can cease for now. And then we have the 5, which is worry. I think in the Crowley system, it's the keyword is defeat, but I don't think this word oro, however you pronounce it in Swedish, means defeat. I think it means more like worry. And then the 6 translates as science, just like in the Crowley. And then we have doubt instead of futility, which is what it is in the Crowley. And then the 8 is distraction. And see how we have the piercing of the heart. Oh, sorry, that's not distraction, that's ruin. Oops, where's the 8? Oh, here we go. The 8 is distraction, which in the Crowley is interference. And then the 9 is cruelty. And the 10 here is desolation, which in Crowley would be ruin. Yeah, So it's interesting because this looks to me like the 10 of Swords in the Smith-Waite, but here it's the 9 of Swords. So, you know, the sort of the nightmare card, but associated with cruelty. And this 10, desolation, we've got the snake. I mean, it's interesting. The imagery is interesting. We've got princesses and princes, and then queens and knights. So kind of a not unlike the Crowley deck with the court figures. Okay. Bleh. I'm getting it's like between not being able to see what I'm looking at and then not being able to read it because it's Swedish. Okay. So what's the point here? Coming back then to this 4, you know, I think this image, you know, again, the sort of levitating meditator. I think the activity of meditation, of course, I'm, you know, as a Buddhist, I'm all over this, and I'm all over thinking about, you know, this is like my stuff, you know, thinking about mind and the quality, the airiness of the swords in this light. You know, the truce of the 4, the kind of suspension of the 4, this sort of moment where, you know, the swords are not plunging down, they're just held in suspense. The figure here is, you know, in this kind of hostile and alien environment, this cold, icy place, but he's under this starry pavilion, he's floating in the air, he's at peace, even though, you know, he's got icicles dripping from him. There's a stillness here, and it's the stillness of a kind of meditative balancing of there's this and there's that. The way in which when our minds are open in a kind of meditative state, right, what we're seeing is that quality of mind where illumination can happen, discrimination happens, but the mind holds those pieces in play and doesn't choose. And I think that that's the positive side of what I was talking about before of paralysis. Like our minds can see distinctions, and that can be overwhelming. But by a slight shift of perspective, that ability to see all of the opportunities and all of the positionalities and all of the players in the game and all of the pieces on the table, that can be overwhelming, as I said, to see all of that. Our minds can we can make such sense of the world. We can see so many things. That can be overwhelming. But that's also our incredibly huge gift as humans. We can hold all of that in here. Okay. I've gabbed on for long enough now. Yeah, that's what I got. Thanks for watching, everyone.